do is get water right in my eyes and take a drink. Of course. Sorry. You all hear me? I'm just kidding. I'm Italian from New York. I know you can hear me. Oh, cool. And I guess this is the forward. Yes. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. How's everyone feeling out there? Good? Excellent. Excellent. I'm hoping you all wouldn't mind joining me in reimagining the present through the timeless lessons of the past. You see, while history does not repeat itself, it most certainly does rhyme. And right now, the entrancing lyric of the psychedelic renaissance is particularly groovy. So I ask for your collective hand in a dance. Please join me and let's explore the possible. The first stop on our journey through space and time will land us in the mid-20th century, so we may briefly examine the context out of which a very important word was born. At the time, in the 1950s, medicines like LSD, mescaline, and mushrooms were referred to as psychotomimetic, meaning they would mimic psychosis. The problem with the word psychotomimetic was first realized when physicians gave LSD to a bunch of patients who suffered from borderline schizophrenia. Those patients said that their unfortunate episodes with schizophrenia were nothing like the LSD experience. Furthermore, other people who did not suffer in like turn were also given LSD, and they didn't feel that they had gone insane. In fact, they felt that the experience was deeply moving and transcendent. So a new word beyond psychotomimetic was sought most diligently by two pioneering luminaries, author and psychonaut Aldous Huxley and psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond. The two had developed a long and lasting friendship ever since Osmond gave Huxley mescaline. A gifted writer, Huxley sent Osmond a short poem, which read, "To make this trivial world sublime, take half a gram of phanerotyme." Phanerotyme derives from two Greek words meaning to make spiritedness visible, and that is the word that Huxley wanted to use. But you see, Osmond liked Greek too, and he wrote back to Huxley rather famously, "To fathom hell or soar angelic, take a pinch of psychedelic." So that's why the word psychedelic was and is so important. Besides itself being a beautiful word, in fact, it's my favorite word, it took these extraordinary plants and fungi out of the erroneous paradigm wrapped up in the term psychotomimetic. It would take another mind equally brilliant to coin another term that is most valuable to understanding the breadth of these fantastic experiences. That man is classics professor at Boston University, Carl Ruck, and that word is entheogen. The word allows us to understand these remarkable plants and fungi through a spiritual lens, as described by many ancient and early modern sources. I feel we owe a debt of gratitude to these gentlemen. Their foresight allowed us to fully explore the range of possibilities that these remarkable experiences can bestow, and how fortunate and valuable that foresight was. As I pored over ancient and medieval documents to write both the witch's ointment and psychedelic mystery traditions, I came across a variety of uses that didn't necessarily fall under the linguistic dominion of psychedelic or entheogenic. Additionally, some of these practices still exist today, and so I'm eager to share my thoughts with all of you on them. My premise is simple. We are in the psychedelic renaissance. We can only take our studies and understandings into these plants and fungal allies and the experiences they generate as far as our vocabulary will allow. And it is in that spirit that I offer the following new lexicon, the theogens. She ran, and that decision alone changed us forever. If those in her tribe made expressions, whether physical or verbal, that she recognized as pertaining to her, if she had a name, we don't know. Nor do we know other details like the color of her eyes, or her skin, or her fur, or even her height. We also don't know more intriguing details, like what she thought of the rising sun. Could she feel love? How much of her was human? Most tragically, we will never know her dreams, nor her waking thoughts of the world around her, her emotional wounds, her cosmology, nothing. All we know is that she ran. And because she ran, we're all here. You see, a rustle in the bushes could have meant anything. Usually it was that unknown, unseen force that moved the leaves. We have the luxury of recognizing that as the wind, but she didn't know that, so she ran. Sometimes, you see, the elders had taught that stirring was not the wind, but a predator. It was therefore best to assume that the crackles and crunches in the underbrush always indicated danger. Should she or any of the females of the clan succumb to the realities of life on the food chain, procreation would come to a grinding halt. The tribe would die. So she ran. Better to assume the sound in the bushes implied a lurking predator instead of a stirring breeze. Better to assign agency to the world around than to suppose happenstance causation always has a correlation when you are on the food chain. She put her hands over her bowed belly, and she ran. And so purely as a means to survive, our ancestors evolved intuition. But evolution, once it starts to flow, rarely stays settled for very long. Intuition evolved into intention, and intention evolved into magic. And magic opened our ancestors to the occult forces of the natural world all around them. Such forces could be seen, felt, and experienced, especially after ingesting a spirit plant or fungi, which, as a general term, I call the theogens. The first, which may have been one of the earliest crude forms of using plants and fungi to fall into spiritual states, I call the somnotheogen, to generate divinity in dreams. It is based off of the research of the late anthropologist Edward Tyler. Tyler theorized that the first access humans ever had to a spirit realm was in their dreams. And it kind of makes sense. For one thing, a sleeping person and a dead person don't look too dissimilar, right? Until the sleeping person wakes up and the dead person starts to rot. But how would our ancestors have interpreted meeting, let's say, a deceased family member in a dream? Would they think it was all a fantasy? Would they think it was a whole other reality? Would they think this other reality existed alongside our own? What did they think about this? Perhaps when our sleeping ancestors met their kin in dreams, they interpreted it as a trip to the spirit realm. Therefore, some of the earliest deliberate attempts to alter one's consciousness required taking heavily soporific plants like mandrake, henbane, and opium, plants that not only guaranteed access to the dream or spirit world, but also caused very, very vivid and lucid states once you arrive there. And there is some evidence for the somnotheogenic state in the ancient world. Take Egypt, where one will find the oldest medical text we have extant, the Edwards Papyrus, which contains recipes said to have been delivered to the author by the goddess Isis herself. Therein, we will find an opium potion. We can imagine scores of patients seeking relief from any number of ailments, whether they be physical, mental, or spiritual, drinking this opium potion, not for its euphoric effects, although those were recognized and appreciated, but rather to transport the person to the spirit world as access through the dreaming mind to meet Isis. There, Isis would heal you in your sleep or give you instructions on how to heal yourself once awake. There were also the poppy goddesses of ancient Crete and other parts of the ancient world. In Italy, at the bottom of Lake Bracciano, diver excavators found a religious room that seems to have been in devotion to a great goddess. This room also housed opium products. Perhaps the room was used for somnotheo medicinal operations, akin to what took place at the temples of Isis. Several thousand years in the future, we find medieval wise women having these same somnotheogenic experiences under the power of ointments laced with these same substances, opium, mandrake, and henbane. I write all about this in my book, The Witch's Ointment. And although when I wrote The Witch's Ointment, I called these experiences entheogenic, I believe I was mistaken at the time. I would now call them somnotheogenic. I just hadn't coined that term yet. So they would rub these ointments on their skin or into their nether regions so as to fall into a deep but lucid dream state. Let's go deep into the somnotheogenic experience by examining one woman, Piorina de Bripio, whose sad and tragic court dossiers give us a glimpse into her somnotheogenic beliefs. Whatever way Piorina entered this state, we don't know. The records are fragmented. She most likely used one of these kinds of soporific ointments inserted into her vagina, which was a common way to apply it. The ointment would put her in a death-like sleep, which was convenient because she was about to enter the realm of the dead. But she couldn't enter the realm of the dead in human form. She had to take on the shape of a corpse, a fox, or a donkey before she could enter. Those last two animals were sacred to her. So Piorina would transform and join other spirits in this world, in the spirit world, and she would meet her goddess, Madame Oriente, who would teach Piorina how to interpret dreams and prophecy, along with the medicinal value of herbs, stones, animals, and how to heal her neighbors. For holding these beliefs, for helping her community, for worshiping a female divinity, for all of this, Piorina was executed. So this is just a small sample of the somnotheogen in history and the tragic way some of these experiences were eradicated. But to return to our progenitors clinging to life on the morning of history, those sent out to hunt may or may not ever come back. The nursing women who stayed behind faced equally tragic perils, for they too could find themselves on the business end of a hungry cat's dentures, and they certainly weren't safe from sharp projectiles lunged into their flesh by warriors from a competing tribe. But women also faced different hazards, the likes of which no man would ever know. Childbirth. And how peculiar it was. Through some disastrous miracle, small, fragile people came out of robust, healthy people. Healthy female people. But why? I mean, they must have thought. Consider for a moment the possibility that understanding male-female procreation is something that we today take for granted. Though it might be difficult for us to imagine, there may have been a time in our ancestors' history when they did not know where babies came from. Well, they knew where babies came from, the woman's body, of course. But how did they get in there in the first place? The first signs of pregnancy, to say nothing of the 9 months that follow, are not immediately apparent after coitus. Somehow, women were growing small people in their bellies. How and when humans properly linked the sexual act with procreation, we will likely never know. But this was a form of magic that only women possessed. And it was a disordered magic. The very act of childbirth put both mother and baby at risk. Either one of them might contract a host of diseases during the process, should one or both survive the process at all. And that was perhaps the cruelest reality for these early people, that women died regularly while giving birth. Death while giving birth. Death while bringing forth life. How very, very mysterious. Her lashes slowly released. Every memory of the grain mother emanated from her mind into the sanctuary's air, smelting with the other parishioners' visionary reverberations into a collective luminescent vision of the goddess. Blossoming beyond bicameral boundaries, every blink sent cool waves of inspiration through the souls of those gathered. The kind of cosmic honey we savor each time mystery gives way to epiphany. Only then can we understand why the priests sound the gong. Only then can we raise our glasses in honor of the dead. Only then does the cosmic grail pour forth its mystery. The divine howl of the ancestors echoed in the bones of these Eleusinian mysti, those initiates of the mysteries. They had drunk the kykeon, and now the sweet psychedelic potion was stirring their souls to ecstasy. Birth, life, death, it all made sense now. Gaia's cosmic sickle cycling the fields of stars and galaxy clusters, likewise an organic reaping of wheat and flesh and bone and breath. Now you are alive, now you are dead. Now this universe is here and now it is gone. She recognized her part in this dance, this endless pouring forth of the cosmic grail into the vast seas of infinity. She was no mere spectator. She was the chalice itself, keeper of all the mysteries and miracles of conception. She was the contents as well, the waterfall of creative majesty. And in a moment, her old life, which promised only fear of the ego's termination, at death, dissipated in the radiance of this ecstatic baptism. And so she danced with the other mysti, danced throughout the night, danced joyfully in a waking dream. Eventually, in the ancient past, a different kind of experience would evolve. It is the counterpart to the entheogenic experience, which I call the extheogenic experience. If entheogen means generating divinity from within, extheogen means generating divinity from without. The reason I think this distinction is important has to do with the invocation of spirits, angels, aeons, or demons that appear in the records, whether they are the ancient Scythians using cannabis to call up ghosts, or medieval necromancers using henbane to wake the dead. Even today, people still use these substances for contacting otherworldly beings, as Rick Strassman's groundbreaking research showed in the 90s. Or one need only think of listening to the spirit of the mushroom. But one of the earliest examples of this kind of extheogenic experience can be found in the famous rites of Eleusis. The rites were mostly secretive, though many scholars have taken a crack at determining the opaque meaning behind the ceremony. One of the more prominent theories holds that the rite served as an explanation for seasonal change. Kore dies in the autumn and is reborn in the spring as Persephone. I think there was something deeper going on at Eleusis beyond a simple explanation for why the flowers grow in the spring and wither in the fall. And that explanation revolves around the kykeon, the beverage drunk at Eleusis that put the initiates into the otherworldly state so they may enter the sacred realm. Different plants and fungi have been posited as the active ingredient in the kykeon. For our purposes, I don't care what was in the kykeon. That doesn't matter. What mattered was the rationale behind the rites, bringing people into ecstatic frenzy so they could enter the spirit world and have a vision of Persephone rising from the dead. And this vision, this extheogenic experience, would lead to contentment in the afterlife. For this vision confronted that deepest fear, a fear so inaudible that nonetheless booms in the beat of every human heart. A fear so nerve-wracking that the gods stitched it shut with a constellation of veins in a futile attempt to prevent the despair from escaping. A fear that all of you, every one of you, share with these ancient Eleusinians. A fear that we all share as strangers, friends, and colleagues. That frighteningly sobering question we all asked ourselves the morning we knew how to reason. Why are we born just to die? The answer came at the height of the ceremony. After the kykeon had started to take effect, a single stalk of wheat was presented to those gathered. In seeing this stalk, the mystis, the initiates, became epops, those who have seen. This perfect meshing of substance, setting, and symbolism allowed these participants to reach deep into the furthest corners of their hopes, their fears, their passions, their loves, even tickle the terrors of the unknown at the hour of death. Whatever the kykeon contained, whether opium, cannabis, or a magic mushroom, both the medicines of life and the dreads of death could be seen, could be felt, and could be experienced at Eleusis. And all those apops would leave knowing the secret, namely, that it is the earth that births, it is the earth that heals, and it is the earth, our divine Mother Gaia, to which we all shall return. And in the sacred madness that was the rites, the apops would watch as Persephone rose from the dead. They had become part of her myth. And myths last for all time. So dread not, delicate mortals. Like the stalk of wheat presented at the height of the ceremony, you are made of the same cosmic building blocks. You are the rain. You are the grain. You are the hunter and the hunted. You are the child born the moment you close your eyes for the last time. But rejoice, sweet one, for you too shall rise again. For you are the contents of the cosmic grail, the limitless elixir that is existence. Because you were born by necessity, you will spill forth forever. Your eyes have opened, Suede Apops. Now close them in capitulation. For no fancy ceremony or poetic words can really substitute for your rendezvous with the inevitable. Surrender, child. You're home. Crawling aloft the glowing coals, the magical smoke permeated the small chamber in which the magician had locked himself. All the cleansings had been satisfied, all the prayers had been said. All the tools had been sufficiently fumigated with precious incenses. His eyes water as the fumes first scratched his corneas, then crept down his throat. He perspires, his heavy ritual regalia sweaty and cumbersome in the small, stuffy chamber. Maybe he's even a little nervous, for he is opening a portal to worlds beyond sight, into the heavens. Indeed, divine knowledge and inspiration were obtainable to those who knew how to access them. The smoke billowed around his head, picking the locks deep in his psyche, gently caressing both the wounds and the redemptions found in the abysses of his mind. He was seeking that most sacred connection housed in the deepest self, a mere mortal hoping he was worthy of grace. And then the visions. A strip of gold expanded over his head as if the angels themselves had drawn a blade across the air from the other side of infinity. The gilded line swelled, opening a gateway, a luminous expanse that within moments had eclipsed the darkness of the chamber with the light of the holy. Spirals of clouds housing the heavenly hierarchy ascended far into eternity, stopping only at the throne of the Lord and Creator of it all. Trumpets sounded from every direction, welcoming this learned practitioner into angelic resplendence. Sometimes, occult secrets are passed down by way of theogenic experiences. These I call the mistheogens, to generate epiphany with psychedelics. Now, I'm not reducing occultism to psychedelics, but history does bear out these kinds of experiences. Pausanias, who traveled around Greece in the 1st century and wrote of his experiences in the geography of Greece, tells us that at one point in his travels, he was inducted into the mysteries of Trophanus. After making the correct prayers and sacrifices, Pausanias drinks some kind of enchanting potion. Actually, he had 2 of them. He is then led down into the small hole in the ground where he will receive a vision in which Trophanos will answer some deep question that Pausanias has. You know, reading Pausanias, I felt a kindred spirit when I took my first ayahuasca draft and asked Gaia the deepest questions of my life. We also see these mistheogens used in ancient Gnostic Christianity, specifically with a rite that was called the Mystery of the Light Maiden. To understand the mystery of the Light Maiden, I have to briefly get into some Gnostic theology. Now, I should say that Gnostic theologies change from one group to the next, but there are some discernible overlaps that will help us understand this most ancient mystiogenic ceremony. The theology to which I refer has to do with the forming of aeons in both the spiritual and material worlds. An aeon is a spiritually advanced being through which cosmic forces are made manifest. They occupy a realm known as the pleroma, or the fullness in Greek. Our modern version of heaven grew out of the Gnostic pleroma. Now, all these cosmic forces began with one supreme being. Sound familiar? This supreme being is so far removed from humans that we are no more likely to understand it than is my cat likely to understand that she should not be walking across my keyboard as I try to write the sentence. Kitty cats. Now, this supreme being was alive, so living came forth as its own aeon. This being could also think, so thought emerged as its own entity. This being was also wise, so wisdom came forth as its own aeon. And she, wisdom, called Sophia by various Gnostics, is our most important aeon for understanding the mystery of the light maiden. Sophia had had unnatural intercourse with herself, giving birth to a bastard deformed offspring named Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth then created the physical world that encompasses us all, encasing us in sinful materialism. The only way to achieve salvation is to escape this sinful materialism. And some Gnostics had the idea of doing this through a mystiogenic orgy to allow Sophia back into the pleroma. 7 women and 7 men would be selected to engage in this sacred fornication in a bedchamber decorated with paintings, pillows, flowing tapestries, and of course, burning incenses. And it is within these incenses that we find our mystiogenic culprit, cannabis. For one of the incenses is referred to as the Indian leaf, which Chris Bennett, foremost cannabis historian, has shown remarkable evidence to be referring to that most sacred herb. Needless to say, I agree with him. So through the combined sacraments of cannabis and coitus, these Gnostics would transcend the material world and through their act allow Sophia back into the pleroma. The 7 women would become Sophias. The 7 men would become cosmic Christs. And such was the nature of the mystiogenic ceremony in ancient Christian Gnosticism. It's better than the movies. Now, there are more examples, but time is limited, so I must be moving on. Quick show of hands. Does anybody in this room deny that psychedelics enhance the creative potential? Anybody? It's okay if you do, you're wrong. But it's fine if you do. Okay, indeed, we might take it as a truism that psychedelics fire the creative imagination. Many people these days still use psychedelics for creative purposes, whether it's a spoken word performer in Manhattan ruminating on the deepest meanings of our oldest questions while high off a joint, or a screenwriter in Los Angeles microdosing to write more intricate and entertaining plots. We all know that psychedelics enhance creativity. But what is the word for that? I humbly offer PYTHIAGEN, using psychedelics to enhance art. People have been using psychedelics for creative purposes for thousands of years. Everyone in this room is no doubt familiar with the Tassili cave art of Eastern Algeria, right? Well, I'd like to focus on a different area of poetigenism, perhaps an area that is largely misunderstood in our own day. Here, I speak of medieval art. Now, while some may suggest that there is evidence for supposed mushrooms painted into Christian art, nothing could be further from the truth. There simply are no mushrooms in Christian art. Sorry, everybody, they're not. In my book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, I have 3 chapters that deal with how Christians actually felt about the psychedelic state, and they were most candid. That will be for another time, but I think it's telling that none of them, while happy to speak about cannabis and opium and mandrake and henbane, never say one word about painting mushrooms in art. Not once. For now, let's say I think there is evidence that some people, however, were, during these medieval times, eating mushrooms and expressing it in their artwork, but isn't from any devotional piece or Christian mosaic. It's just someone who, while copying out a manuscript of Santa Sardini's Liber de Venenas, which means the Book of Poisons, decided to leave perhaps a wink and a nod to those of us who would know the secret many years, even hundreds of years later. The titles in the treatise are all very plain looking. There's nothing out of the ordinary about this. Even known theogens like henbane, which we see here, are not particularly striking. The entry for opium is slightly more embellished, perhaps giving us a little glimpse into this scribe's extracurricular activities. But there was one entry in this entire treatise that looks absolutely nothing like all the others. The entry for mushrooms. Look at that. I mean, there's flowers on it. This looks like a medieval hippie drew it. Importantly, there's no conspiracy here. There's no cover-up. There's no imagining mushrooms in Christian art where there aren't any. There's simply a person who sampled some mushroom and decided to express it while copying out a version of Santa Sardini's treatise. Now, if that doesn't convince you, in more recent history, a multitude of tests conducted from the late 1950s to the early 1960s examined the relationship between psychedelics and creativity. These were largely pushed by a guy named Oscar Janiger, a psychiatrist living in Los Angeles. Janiger didn't have any intention of studying the effects of psychedelics and creativity, or the relationship, I should say, between psychedelics and creativity. One of his volunteers was an artist, and this was the 50s. You could just go to your doctor and take LSD. This guy just so happened to ask Janiger if he could draw this puppet, this Kachina doll that Janiger had sitting on the shelf, and Janiger said sure. And that sparked the idea to test psychedelics on creativity. A battery of tests was conducted in this area from the 1950s until the mid-1960s. Two schools of thought came out of these experiments. One school, we'll call them the Janiger camp, said that the creative miracle of psychedelics is the way they bring out the hidden enchantment and vibrancy of everything, and to borrow from Aldous Huxley, make this trivial world sublime. Janiger believed that our ability to receive inspiration from the wondrous world around us led to creativity. Others, like Sidney Cohen, felt differently. For Cohen, what LSD, mushrooms, mescaline, and the rest did was allow you to block out the external world and go deep inside yourself and find that spark of creative divinity. That was the true beauty of the psychedelic state. Personally, I feel that both schools of thought are correct, that we are not only surrounded by the awe and beauty of the natural world, but that we are, each one of us, microdoses of that initial cosmic magic. At last, night had fallen. The residual purples and oranges of twilight that moments ago had projected across the whole of the firmament slowly vanished, riding on the sun's tails as it too drowned in the horizon. The vault of stars that guards the heavens unlocked, pouring tiny diamonds into the ether. Beaches along the jagged coastline of Thessaly look especially beatific under the auspicious blessings of a full moon as it is charioted across the sky on a cool midsummer breeze. A priestess positions herself on the tallest rock, overlooking the threshold where the fluid ocean gently caresses the sturdy shore. She disrobes, then pulls a small burner, a simple iron dagger doused in flint, and in sulfur, and a flint rock out of a sack. Striking dagger to flint, the priestess creates a spark in the burner. For a moment, she stares intently at the growing flames, her pupils enchanted by this inexpressible fire. Returning to her task, she pulls a smaller satchel out of her pack, eagerly removing the string that secured its contents. Dipping her fingers into the cloth, the priestess pulls out a handful of dried foliage, conceivably cannabis, maybe mandrake, or opium, or henbane, or most probably some mixture of several. She drops the flore onto the burning coal. Unfolding reality with sacred verse and ancient herb, she sends enchantments out to the stars, drawing down the moon so as to redouble the efficacy of her spirit plants. Her visions grow more intense as she sings even louder, pulling her consciousness deeper into a prophetic state. In a moment, She will collapse onto the ground as her soul flies from her body, entering that anomalous space between the living and the dead. For thousands of years, the human animal has employed theogenic herbs and fungi into magical practices. Magic is symbolism that guides us through the disarray of life. It is the instrument by which we turn spiritual lead into heavenly gold. Magic is empowerment. Which brings us to the use of theogens in magic, which I call the PYTHIAGENS. There were and are many ways to utilize the pythagenic experience. In fact, as many as there are magical operations. But 10 minutes left, just fewer. We're gonna have 5, just a handful tonight. One of the more popular pythagenic acts was in the form of prophecy, as we see with the ancient oracles, notably at Delphi. There, the oracle would inhale natural gases creeping up from a crevice in the ground, be overtaken by them, and begin to tell of her visions. This practice was found all over the ancient and medieval landscape as well, and they didn't just use natural gases, but the records show they were using things like henbane, deadly nightshade, and other psychoactives. But not every use of a pythagogen was meant to prophecy. Sometimes they would even be used in warfare. Around 1000 before the Common Era, the king of Athens, Nopus, sent his armies to the Aegean Sea to vanquish the last Ionian stronghold in the city of Eretria. An attentive king, Nopus sought the counsel of an oracle. The oracle told him to place as the general of his armies a woman named Chrysemi, a priestess of the mysteries of Hecate, goddess of magic. In those days, all priestesses of Hecate's mysteries were taught the use of powerful herbs and fungi. Only she could provide the kinds of guarantees that a king like Nopus demanded. Chrysemi turned out to be not only a skilled herbalist, but a brilliant war strategist. First, Chrysemi ordered a bull be fed some kind of theogen and left in a stall for about an hour. We don't know what the bull ate, but as it waited in the stall, it was decorated with ribbons of purple and gold. It had garlands hung around its neck, and gold plates were placed over its horns. Chrysemi walked across the battlefield towards the enemy lines. I don't know about you, but I just see this woman in these flowing robes, just like elegant and badass all at the same time. She orders the bull be brought before her, which she will sacrifice to the Athenian gods for victory in battle. But whatever she had fed this bull had started to take effect, and the bull, in a frenzy, broke free from her and ran towards the enemy camp. So the Ionians caught the bull, and they laughed at her, and they said, see, this is what happens when you put a woman as the general of your armies. So they decided, well, we're going to sacrifice this bull to the Ionian gods. But you see, that's just what Chrysemi wanted them to do. For all sacrificial meat was then eaten as part of communion with the gods. Whatever Chrysemi fed the bull was so powerful that it transferred from the bull to the soldiers. They began to run around the camp in a maddened state. Chrysemi had hexed them. And then she sent her troops in to slaughter them all. A sort of psychedelic Trojan horse, if you will. So these are the theogens. And these are actually only a handful of ways that humans have used these medicines for thousands of years. I write far more about it in my book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, and also in my new book, Microdosing Magic, a psychedelic spell book. So let's guard the flame of our ancestors while lighting new fires to dance around. For in that rhythm do we find the spark of Gaia's heavenly touch. There is mystery birthed in every breath, new life sprung from every death. There is love and hope in the wild and weird, and answers in the shadow sphere. While still loving the question of queries unsolvable, I want to thank you all for this dance as we reimagine the possible. Thank you all for being here. Do you have time for questions?
No, we got to stop.
Okay.
We're going to do a book signing. Hey, Mike?